Inference Plus Story Short Number 31, Series B. The ride was a contrast between silence and noise. The passengers crammed 3 and 4 to a seat were silent except for the occasional rustle of a skirt or the rubbery squeal of a shoe against the floor. The engine, however, created an incessant roar that would have drowned out any attempt to speak had anyone aboard words to say, which none did. Words had run out at least 20 hours ago when the reality of their destination had set in. George saw it plainly now. They had been fools. Only fools would turn themselves in willingly. Only fools would think an enemy was a friend. Fools, all of them, a fact realized too late. In the afternoon, when the sun bore down on the bus's metal roof, the temperature inside was stifling. The windows had been fitted with stops, for the safety of the children, they were told, and opened only a few inches near the ceiling. Those with the balance to stand pushed their mouths and noses to the cracks and gulped at the whistling air. George wrestled his 3-year-old sister as she bucked and twisted in fitful irritation, before finally melting into feverish, headachy sleep between him and his father. When the sun began to sink west, it beat relentlessly through the right side windows. The passengers' hands and feet swelled like overproofed bread, and George noted his mother's agitation as she tried to remove her wedding ring, but could not. The skin around the thin gold band was turning bluish, and he impulsively grabbed her hand, slipped her finger into his mouth to wet it, then pried the ring off. His mother's face, already flushed from the heat, grew redder still with embarrassment from the intimacy of this act, but George felt only relief that the finger was returning to its normal golden hue. She wiped the ring on the sleeve of her dress and tucked it into her handbag. The younger men, not yet made so feral as to abandon their manners, quietly moved first to the elderly, then the young children to the slightly cooler left. George and his father stayed on the right. "Papa," George whispered softly, "go sit with Mama, help her with Gracie." Yasu stiffened. "I'm not an old man," he hissed. "I won't go sit in the shade like an old man." George knew better than to argue with his father. In truth, Yasu was getting older. George surely wasn't the only one to notice the thinning hair and slowing walk. Papa and Mama married when she was 18 and he was 38. George had been born on their first wedding anniversary and had been their only child until 3 years ago, when Gracie had made a surprise appearance. They all adored her, but George couldn't help but notice how long it took Papa to pull himself up from the rug when he sat with her to play dolls. Papa hadn't exactly been spry even when George was a boy. He was always the father who watched the boys play ball, but never played himself. His father's age had embarrassed him when he was younger, the way he exhaled in relief when he sank into a chair, so unlike the young and vibrant fathers of his friends. Remembering that silent disrespect made him look away from his father in shame. He promised himself that Gracie would never disrespect their father the way he had. The land outside was an uncurling ribbon, smooth and flat and dry. Mountains cragged at the edge of the horizon like teeth biting at the cloudless sky. It went on and on, unspooling. Gracie awakened, bleary and confused, and began to cry again. "Mama, how long?" The little girl's thumb crept into her mouth, but her mother did not tell her to take it out. It no longer seemed important for her daughter to behave like a big girl. Let her be a baby. A baby could be held close, protected. "Not so long, Gracie-chan, not so long." George noticed that Mother was stroking Gracie's hair the way she had done when his sister was a baby. This reversion to an earlier time tightened the knot of fear that had formed in his stomach as soon as they'd boarded. When at last the sun sank below the mountains, the passengers found themselves somewhat revived. There was even a stop to allow them to stretch their legs. At first, George could not believe they'd been turned loose. What if they decided to run? But when he turned in a circle and saw nothing but purplish twilight, he understood that no one would run. There was nowhere to go. The guards held guns, but did not train them on the people, knowing there would be no need. They laughed and chatted casually among themselves. One came around with a bucket of water. There was no dipper, so they cupped their hands to drink, the adults holding their hands to the mouths of the children, who were soon drenched down their fronts. There were no toilets, not even a tree behind which one could squat. A guard, the same one who had dispensed the water, saw the humiliation on the faces of the haggard people and ushered men in one direction and women to the other so they could relieve themselves with some scant dignity. Some of the others laughed and teased him for being so soft, and it made George want to punch them. There was no toilet paper, so the women used the handkerchiefs from their pocketbooks to clean themselves. Some left the squares of cloth there in the dust, but the more pragmatic among them folded them up again and returned them to their bags beside their lipsticks and checkbooks for next time. Once the sun had fully set, the world outside was swallowed up by the night. Even the mountains, so large and solid in the afternoon sun, disappeared without a trace into the endless blackness. The heat of the day had evaporated into an icy chill, and they closed up the windows and huddled together for warmth. The water-soaked children shivered and cried, and their desperate mothers removed the slips from beneath their dresses and swaddled them in the delicate silk and satin. George rummaged beneath his seat and found his rumpled suit coat, grateful he had dressed so formally for the journey. He used it to cover his mother and Gracie as they slipped once again into restless dreams. Father did not sleep. He simply sat with his forehead pressed against the window, staring out at nothing. They were not yet even at their destination, and already his face was slack with defeat. And things would only get harder. George knew this, and a weight of new responsibility for his mother and sister pressed the air from his lungs. He did not sleep. He stared at his father, who continued to stare at nothing. When the horizon to the east began to fade to gray with the dawn, he felt a relief so profound he nearly wept. All night he had been gripped with the fear that the rest of the world had drifted away, and they existed alone in an alien universe. The re-emergence of a line between land and sky allowed him to align himself once again with the rhythms of the earth. When at last someone shouted, "Look!" even the rows of barbed wire fencing before them seemed welcoming. At least they proved the continued existence of humanity. Welcome to Heart Mountain, Wyoming Relocation Camp. Per Executive Order 9066, you have been deemed a potential threat to the safety of the nation and will remain under armed supervision until further notice. Please file out in an orderly fashion and form rows of 5, men to the right, women and children to the left.